man who never blinks. Some people say the devil hides in the details. I say he hides in the eyes. I learned that the hard way. And now, every time I close my own eyes, I wonder if he's watching me. The first encounter. It started on a Monday. The worst things always seem to start on Mondays. I was walking home from work late at night. The air was thick with the smell of rain, and the streetlights buzzed with that eerie yellow glow. That's when I saw him, a man standing perfectly still at the bus stop across the street. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit that looked a little too stiff, a little too clean. But it wasn't his clothes that unsettled me, it was his face, or rather his eyes. He was staring directly at me, unblinking. At first I thought maybe he was lost in thought, but as I kept walking, something felt off. He never shifted his gaze, he never moved a muscle, and he never blinked. A chill ran down my spine. I quickened my pace, trying to shake the uneasy feeling crawling under my skin. I told myself it was nothing, just some guy waiting for a bus. But then, the next night, I saw him again. Always watching. I was at the grocery store, standing in line when I felt it. That prickling sensation like someone was drilling holes into my skull with their eyes. I turned my head, and there he was. Standing completely still in the frozen food aisle, hands at his sides, eyes locked onto mine. Not moving, not blinking, I swallowed hard. Had he followed me here? No, that was crazy. The city was big, maybe it was just coincidence, but deep down, I knew better. This wasn't random, he was watching me. The incident on the subway days passed, and he was everywhere. At the coffee shop, across the street from my apartment, reflected in the glass of office buildings, always watching, always unblinking. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt his gaze pressing down on me like a physical weight. Then came the subway ride. It was late, past midnight. The train was mostly empty. I sat near the back, exhausted, my head heavy. The train stopped at a station. The doors slid open, and he stepped inside. He didn't sit, didn't hold on to anything, just stood in the middle of the car, facing me, watching me. The air in my lungs turned solid. I wanted to look away, to pretend he wasn't there, but I couldn't, because then something happened. Something I will never forget. The smile. For the first time since I had seen him, he moved, not much, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth, a slow, stretching smile, and his lips moved. No sound, just silent words. I couldn't hear them, but I knew what he was saying. Don't blink. My blood turned to ice. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart pounding. I don't know why. Maybe instinct, maybe fear. The train screeched to a halt, the lights flickered, and when I opened my eyes, he was gone. Not just from the train. Gone, like he had never been there at all. The truth about him. I wish I could say that was the end, that I never saw him again. But that was only the beginning. The next morning I did something I shouldn't have done. I started searching. I asked around, described him to people at work, at coffee shops, even online. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody had ever seen him. And then, one person replied to my post, a single message. If you've seen him, it's already too late. My stomach dropped. I replied, demanding answers. The user never responded. Their account vanished. That night, I barely slept. And when I finally did, I dreamed of him. Standing at the foot of my bed, watching me, smiling. The final encounter, I tried to ignore it, to move on, but the nightmares didn't stop, and neither did he. One night, I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The room was suffocatingly silent. And then I realized I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis. I had experienced it before, but this felt different, because this time, he was there, sitting in the chair across from my bed, leaning forward, still, watching. But this time he was closer. I could see his face clearly now. His skin was too smooth, too perfect, like wax. His eyes weren't just unblinking, they were wrong, too wide, too deep, like a pit with no bottom. He raised a finger to his lips and whispered, "Don't blink." My lungs burned, my body screamed to move, to run. But I blinked, and everything shattered. Darkness, cold, and then, the worst sound I've ever heard. A breath, right next to my ear. Aftermath, I woke up screaming. My body finally moved, and I scrambled to turn on every light in my apartment. My skin was ice cold. My heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I checked every door, every window. Everything was locked. He was gone. But the damage was done. I started seeing things, shadows, shapes at the edge of my vision. Sometimes I wake up in different places. I know I went to bed, but I wake up on the floor, or sitting in the chair where he sat, And sometimes I wake up with my eyes wide open, staring, unblinking, like him. The warning: I don't know who he is. I don't know what he is. But I do know this: he only comes for those who notice him. If you see him once, he will follow you. If you see him twice, he will watch you. If you see him 3 times, run. And whatever you do, don't blink. The ghost who left handprints on my walls. There are things that happen in life that simply have no explanation. Events that defy logic, moments that creep into your mind and refuse to leave. This is one of those stories, and it all started with the handprints. A new beginning, or so I thought. When I first moved into the house, I thought it was perfect. It was an old Victorian-style home with high ceilings, wooden floors, and a staircase that curved elegantly toward the 2nd floor. It had history. I had just gone through a rough breakup, and I needed a fresh start, a quiet place to heal. But the house had other plans. At first, the signs were subtle, barely noticeable. The floorboards creaked at night, even when I wasn't walking on them. The air always felt slightly colder in the hallway upstairs. Nothing unusual for an old house. At least, that's what I told myself. Then, the handprints appeared. The first handprint. It happened on a Wednesday. I remember because I had just finished painting my bedroom walls, a soft shade of gray. I was standing back, admiring my work, when I saw it. A single handprint. Faint, almost like a smudge. At first I thought I had brushed against the wall by accident. But when I pressed my own hand against it to compare, I realized something chilling. It was too small, like a child's hand. I wiped it away, chalking it up to my imagination. But 2 days later, there were more. The prints began to multiply. They weren't just on the bedroom wall anymore. They were in the hallway, in the kitchen, on the bathroom mirror. Dozens of them, all the same size, all appearing overnight. I scrubbed them away, but they always returned. I started feeling uneasy in my own home. The air felt thicker, like something unseen was watching me. And then one night, I heard it. The sound that made my blood turn to ice. The whispering. It was late, past midnight. I had just settled into bed, trying to ignore the unease that had taken root in my chest. That's when I heard it. Soft, almost too quiet to notice. A whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was there, coming from the walls. I held my breath, straining to listen. My mind raced. Was it the pipes? The wind? No, it was a voice, and it was inside the walls. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. I turned on every light in my bedroom, trying to chase away the shadows, but the handprints were already back. A dark history. The next morning, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed answers. I went to the local library and started digging into the history of the house. What I found made my stomach twist. In 1947, a family had lived there, a mother, father, and their 6-year-old daughter, Lily. One winter, Lily had gone missing. Her parents searched for days, but she was never found. Some believed she had wandered off into the woods behind the house. Others whispered darker theories, that something had taken her. The house was eventually abandoned, then sold. Over the years, the owners never stayed for long. Reports of strange occurrences, objects moving, cold spots, handprints, had been recorded by multiple tenants. No one had stayed in the house longer than 6 months. I had been there for 5. The night everything changed that night, I couldn't sleep. The knowledge of what had happened in the house gnawed at me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. Then, thump, a noise from the hallway. I sat up, my pulse quickening. Thump, thump. It was getting closer. Then the whispering started again. But this time, I could understand the words. Help me. I barely had time to react before the bedroom door slammed open. The lights flickered, the air turned ice cold, and in the doorway I saw it, a small, shadowy figure. A little girl. Her eyes were hollow, her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then she lifted her hand, slowly, deliberately, pressed it against the wall. A fresh, dark handprint appeared beneath her palm. And then, she vanished. The last message. I barely slept after that. The next morning I found something new. Something worse. The handprints had changed. Before they had been small, innocent. Now they were bloody, and beneath them scrawled in childlike writing, "She won't let me go." That was the final straw. I packed my bags and left that day. The haunting never ends. It's been years since I left that house, but the handprints, they followed me. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I see them on my bedroom wall, faint, almost invisible, but there. And sometimes, just before I drift off to sleep, I hear a whisper, "Help me." The child who wasn't supposed to exist. Some stories begin with a tragedy. Others begin with a mystery. This one begins with a birth that was never supposed to happen. The family's secret. The Callahan family was a quiet one. They lived in an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, far from prying eyes. Mr. and Mrs. Callahan had 2 children, an older daughter, Emily, and a younger son, James. At least, that's what the world believed. But in reality, there was another child. A child no one ever spoke about. A child who, by all logical reasoning, wasn't supposed to exist. A hidden presence. It was Emily who first noticed something was wrong. She was 7 years old when she began hearing strange noises at night. The sound of tiny footsteps padding down the hallway, a soft giggle echoing from the shadows. At first, she thought it was James playing a trick on her. But James was only a baby, barely old enough to walk, let alone sneak around the house in the middle of the night. One evening, as Emily lay in bed, she heard the soft creak of her closet door slowly opening. Her heart pounded. In the dim glow of her nightlight, she saw a small shadow standing just beyond the doorframe. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She only whispered, "Who are you?" The shadow tilted its head. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, it replied, "You already know." The forgotten child. The next morning, Emily told her parents about the shadow. They exchanged nervous glances, then told her she was imagining things, but she wasn't. The next night, she saw the shadow again, and this time it stepped closer. It was a boy. He looked about her age, maybe younger. He wore an old-fashioned nightgown, his feet bare and dirty. His eyes were dark, hollow pits that seemed to drink in the light. Emily should have been terrified, but something about him felt familiar. "What's your name?" she asked. The boy hesitated. Then in that same eerie whisper, he replied, "Nathan." Emily's stomach twisted. That was her older brother's name, a brother who had died before she was born, a brother who, by all accounts, should not exist anymore. A hole in the family's story. Emily didn't mention Nathan to her parents again, but she started digging for answers. She searched through old family albums, looking for pictures of her lost brother. There were none. She asked relatives about him, but they all responded the same way. "You must be mistaken. There was never a Nathan." That was a lie. Emily was sure of it. One night, while her parents were asleep, she snuck into their bedroom and searched through their drawers. And that's when she found it. A single faded photograph. A picture of her parents holding a baby boy in their arms. On the back of the photograph, written in shaky handwriting, was a date. March 4th, 1988. And beneath it, a single word. Erased. The unraveling Emily was too young to understand what it meant, but she knew something was very wrong. She started seeing Nathan more frequently. Sometimes he would stand in the corner of her room, watching her with those dark, empty eyes. Other times, she would hear his laughter drifting down the hallways. But the worst part, he was getting stronger. At first, he could barely touch things. But soon, Emily started waking up to find her toys scattered across the floor. Her closet doors would swing open on their own. And then, the scratches appeared. Deep, jagged lines carved into the wooden floor of her bedroom. Words, "Let me stay." Emily was no longer sure if Nathan was a ghost or something worse. A sinister truth. As the years passed, the hauntings escalated. James, her younger brother, began seeing Nathan too. At first, he thought he had an imaginary friend. But his giggles soon turned to screams. He would wake up in the middle of the night crying about a boy in his room. A boy who whispered things to him. Things no child should know. One night, Emily overheard her parents arguing. She pressed her ear to the door, her breath catching in her throat. "We should have never done it," her father whispered. "We should have let him go." "But we didn't," her mother replied. "And now he won't leave." Emily's blood ran cold. What had they done? The vanishing one stormy night, everything came to a head. The house felt heavier than usual, like the walls were breathing. Emily woke up to the sound of James screaming. She ran to his room, heart pounding, and froze. Nathan was standing at the foot of James's bed, but he wasn't a shadow anymore. He was solid, real, and his face, it was twisted in rage. "They forgot me." His voice was no longer a whisper. It was a growl vibrating through the room. "They tried to erase me." Emily lunged for James, grabbing him just as the room exploded into chaos. Books flew from the shelves, the walls groaned. The air itself felt like it was screaming. Then the door slammed shut. And when it finally opened, Nathan was gone. The aftermath. The Callahan family moved out soon after. They never spoke of what happened in that house. Emily grew up, James grew up, but neither of them ever forgot Nathan. Years later, Emily returned to the old farmhouse. It had been abandoned, left to rot. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. And then, in the silence, she heard it, a whisper. "You already know." Emily turned, her breath hitching in her throat. On the wall, in faded letters, was a single message. "Let me stay.